Gankle and Zooble and King or two. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Nick, and you may or may not know, but I am a massive fan of the Amazing Digital Circus. Now, over time, that has come to be kind of like an indicator that you are like someone to be not associated with, but I've had my fair share of fandoms like that. I mean, I still love My Hero Academia after everything the fandom has been through. And guess what? I don't care. I don't care what people think of me. So, it's been almost 3 years since the Amazing Digital Circus first aired, which is like insane to me. It feels like the pilot like literally just came out. And I still remember my first impression of the pilot. I remember it first came up on my YouTube like homepage or whatever, and I saw it and I was like, why are they recommending YouTube kids stuff on my page? But then I went on TikTok and I saw how a lot of people were talking about that it's not a kids show and it's actually like really good. So I was like, okay, let me check it out. I love animation. So basically, just to preface, the Amazing Digital Circus is a limited animated series created by a creator named Gooseworks and produced by the indie animation studio Glitch. It has 9 episodes in total, and you can watch them here on YouTube on Glitch's official page or on Netflix. It basically follows the main character that we call Pomni, who gets trapped in this digital circus where she finds 5 other humans basically in her same situation, and the whole thing is led by a very like unhinged AI named Kane. I'm really sad it's over, but now that it is over, I feel like I can give my 2 cents on it because that's what I do. I didn't want to judge an uncompleted project because, you know, I wanted to like analyze the whole picture. And so now here we are. Today I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Amazing Digital Circus. And by good, bad, and ugly, I don't actually mean good, bad, and ugly. I just mean the things that I think worked well, and then the things that I think could have been improved upon, and then things that just didn't work in my opinion. And there's going to be spoilers because I'm going to reference the finale. So if you haven't finished the show, highly recommend go watch it and then come back to this video. Please, don't leave me hanging. Okay, let's go. So starting off with the good, or things that I think the show did really well, the animation was really good. Now on to the bad. No, I'm kidding. So I'm also like so grateful that indie animation is getting so much more attention, and I feel like the Amazing Digital Circus is a big part of this because obviously indie animation has been a thing for a long time, but I really feel like it's surging in popularity recently. And if nothing else, I'm just really glad that this specific show got a lot of attention. I mean, you can see the fan base is massive. It also got releases on Netflix, which I thought was crazy. If you scroll through the playlist of the show on YouTube, every single episode has like hundreds of millions of views, which is insane. I'm pretty sure the pilot even has like 450 million or something. And then obviously it got an international theatrical release, which we very rarely see that for like animated web shows. Like that's so crazy. And it made me really happy to see people enjoying animation as a medium. I have an entire video just ranting and raving about how much I love animation. So I was really glad that it, you know, got so popular. And I also love that because obviously there was such great reception of the show, you can see the budget for the animation increasing with every single video. Like if you compare the pilot to the finale, and you look at the animation differences, it's like night and day. It's so funny. One thing that I saw that people kept noticing was that as the show went on, the characters' eyes kept getting bigger, I guess, as the animation budget went up, and they could spend more time on like small details like that just to make the characters more like dynamic or visually interesting, and I thought that was so funny. Obviously, I absolutely adored the concept. I thought that it was so interesting, especially in our increasingly digitized world. It was giving almost like Black Mirror of like a human consciousness trapped inside of like a digital space. Another comparison that I thought of while watching the show was The Hollow on Netflix, which is also about like a group of teens, I guess, that are trapped inside this digital world and they're like trying to find a way to get out. Although the difference there is from the beginning, all of the characters in the Amazing Digital Circus know that they're in a digital world, whereas in The Hollow, they don't know it until like the show progresses and then their main goal is to get out. Highly recommend that one if you've never watched it. I've only watched season 1, but I loved it. But yeah, I really love the concept. It managed to balance being like really interesting and sort of like, you know, the mystery was like drawing us in, but it wasn't too far out there where it was like this would never happen. Like it could happen with the way that like AI is advancing and stuff. Like this could happen, and that's honestly very scary. I guess the closest comparison would probably be like VR, but if it was able to like scan a copy of your mind and then put that into the world as opposed to you going into the world. But you know, I also really loved the queer representation. You know how Zubal's non-binary in a relationship near the end with Gangle, and then Jax being confirmed trans by both, I believe, Ragatha's voice actor and Gooseworks, which we'll get to that later, but I really appreciated how all of the representation was sort of incorporated in a very natural way instead of it being like forced for like, guys, we're so woke. Like it just felt natural. And then the next thing in my notes is pretty much just me like gushing about the show and just like how much I loved it as like a full project. I feel like this setting was so well designed. I loved how it lures you in like almost like a kids show, and that's how it's supposed to feel when they have their whole intro and everything. And the fact that, you know, they get censored whenever they swear, it perfectly sets up this like childlike imagining of like a playhouse or I guess a circus. It's so perfectly set up to blend those elements of like childlike whimsy, but also the distinct awareness that everything around you isn't real and that it is in fact digital. You know, even us seeing like the digital void in episode 1, it was like a perfect blend of the two. I feel like all the characters, or I should say most of the characters, were really likable, and I found myself getting really attached to them. I feel like they did a really great job of creating them each with personalities distinct enough that you could relate to each of them individually, but then also see them form this cohesive unit and have impact as an ensemble. You know, I thought that the voice acting was really good, the script was really good, and I got super invested maybe like 2-3 episodes in. Like I was so obsessed with the show. I remember I made this evil man that I knew at the time watch the show with me, and I kept checking in with him after every episode, and I was like, do you want to stop? Like, are you bored? And he was like, no, let's keep going. And I was like, yay. I just love that Glitch and I guess Gooseworks were able to create this like complete world that was so easy to immerse yourself in, both because the setting and the characters, and I just feel like it was so consistent in quality, in lore, in just everything about the show. Like I don't feel this way with every show that I watch, but I feel like every time I would watch The Amazing Digital Circus, it was like I would forget where I was. Like I wouldn't be aware of my surroundings because it was like I was in the circus. It was so bright and vibrant and clearly depicted that I was so easily able to just like step into the shoes of whatever character we were following. Oh, it was so incredible. Of course, it kind of sucked having to wait like months between each episode, but I understand how long animation takes, and I wouldn't want to rush the animators or anything. Because, you know, when you try and rush creativity, things slip through the cracks, or honestly, you just come out with like a worse product. So I was willing to wait if it means that the product was going to be something incredible. And it was. Just sometimes I would get that itch. And I was like, I want more content. Now on to the bad, which again is not bad, just more so points that I found could be improved. I don't even know if this should go in this category because apparently I'm just like stupid, and I didn't realize that Jax was trans throughout the entire show. I didn't even realize it until I went on like TikTok and I saw people talking about it and like saying that Jax was trans and everything, and I was like, what? And then I looked into it, and yes, Jax is in fact trans, and I was like, I never would have guessed that. And just for reference, I will in this part refer to Jax with he, him pronouns, and that's not in any way because I'm like denying that he's trans or anything. I completely acknowledge and accept that fact, and I think that that's great. I'm only using he, him because 1, we know that pronouns are not gendered. 2, Gooseworks said that any pronouns are okay for Jax, and 3, he never came out in the show or explicitly said that he wanted to change his pronouns or anything like that. So I'm just putting that out there. So looking back on like the elements and the details that help people realize that Jax was trans, I like that that was subtle. I like that it wasn't too in your face or too obvious. I think that that makes the realization that he is in fact trans at the end, I think that that makes it so much more rewarding and so much more fulfilling, and also kind of bittersweet because he never really got to accept that part of himself in the circus. But like I said, I had absolutely no idea, and I wish that there had just been like one more piece of evidence or something that would have made it so in my mind it would have clicked and I would have been like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Jax is trans, but I never got that. And that's why it was a little bit unsatisfying for me. And again, maybe this is just me, maybe this is just like a personal thing with the show, but because like I said, like everybody seemed to know but me. And I'm going to explain my thought process here, okay? So I really just thought that Jax was like a guy with really, really high levels of fragile masculinity. And to be honest, I thought that the whole scene in Ribbit's room just like really confirmed that, because Jax said that his mom had pushed this really like heightened ideal of masculinity onto him. And that makes perfect sense why it would like seep into his psyche and like his perception of the world, because we see that happening all the time with like young men in like the manosphere. They hear that they need to be this like super alpha male, like macho man provider, all this kind of stuff, and so it makes them crave this like unattainable ideal of masculinity, and they push away any elements of femininity because they think it makes them weak or undesirable or something. And that's what made sense to me. That's how I perceived Jax. That's why in my perception he was so misogynistic, and why he rejected anything he might see as feminine, like the maid dress, because he was so afraid of that like weakening what he thought was his masculinity. And like my thing is, a lot of people bring up the maid dress as an example of him being uncomfortable in like a feminine scenario because he had those like conflicting ideals in his head. But honestly, like I just thought that it was because he just didn't want to wear a maid dress. Like, I feel like they should have just made it a regular dress if they were trying to get across the point that he didn't want to present feminine, or he was uncomfortable or unable to show vulnerability in showing that side of himself. Because it's like a maid dress. A maid dress has already been so heavily sexualized that it's like, I don't think anybody would want to be put in that. And then for Ribbit putting the bow on Jax's head and being like, your secret is safe with me. A lot of people saw that as her accepting Jax as trans femme and saying, I accept you for who you are and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't perceive it that way. I thought that the bow was just sort of like a playful gesture to show that like, thank you for opening up to me. Like, I'm glad that you trust me. Because he never like overtly came out to Ribbit. He just said like, I shared something really personal with my mom that I thought would get her off my back, but he never like said that he was trans, or at least we never saw it on screen. And then the most obvious piece of evidence that people kept bringing up was the use of the song Isn't She Lovely by Stevie Wonder near the end of Jax's arc. But even that didn't clue me in. Like, to be honest, I didn't even think anything of it. Like, I literally thought that they just used that song because it fit the kind of like jolly sun-soaked rose tinted vibes that the flashback montage was going for. And I barely even thought about the lyrics, but like when I did, I was just thinking, oh, it's supposed to be ironic because the lyrics are Isn't She Lovely and all that kind of stuff, and we know Jax was anything but lovely during his time in the circus. He was awful, and that made me more confident that the whole thing was just supposed to be ironic. Like, it's almost like when people are idealized after their death, like I thought they were like kind of making light of that. And then yeah, the fact that we're getting a whole happy montage during an event that's supposed to symbolize somebody's like death basically in the circus, like I thought that the whole thing was just ironic. Like, I was literally watching it laughing. Like, I was like, what is going on? But apparently that was supposed to be him accepting himself as trans. And after seeing people talking online and bringing up different points, like I can totally see how what I thought was his fragile masculinity was actually supposed to be like gender dysphoria and his resulting insecurities from that, and the whole like Isn't She Lovely thing, because the lyrics in the actual song are talking about the birth of a girl, so I guess that's supposed to be like Jax finally acknowledging that he's trans. And obviously, I mean, Gooseworks and Amanda, like I said, have already confirmed that Jax is trans, so I'm not trying to debate that and say that, oh, it's not actually true. I was just saying it didn't come across for me. And honestly, I watched this one YouTube video by a creator named Sunito, and they like perfectly broke down Jax's character and motivations and arc and everything in a way that was just so good. Like, I was watching the video and I kept pausing every couple seconds and I was like, I see what you mean. Like, it was a really good video, so I would highly recommend checking it out. They go into a lot more depth about Jax's character than I guess I probably will here. But yeah, I thought that was pretty fire. So another thing that I was like a little bit unsatisfied with was the fact that Jax abstracted off screen, because I was genuinely so confused. Like, when they cut to the scene of like the abstracted form like running across the floor, I literally thought that was like Queenie or like Kaufmo or something. And I thought that because Kane had been killed basically and the circus was in ruins, I thought that the seller had like opened up or something, and then the abstracted people were just running around. And I had always perceived abstraction as a representation of the people in the circus finally like basically like losing their minds. Like I thought that it was supposed to be like a full psychotic or like mental break from reality when all of like the stresses and the comprehension of their situation finally caught up to them, and they were like gone. But I've seen a lot of people compare it essentially to suicide, and I feel like that makes a lot more sense, especially in Jax's case, because like a lot of times when people take their own lives, it can seem really sudden to the people around them, and it seems like it comes out of nowhere sometimes. So I get that that's what they were kind of trying to go for, and that makes sense. And I also get that we already had that really long sequence in one of the earlier episodes where we were like in Jax's mind when he was abstracting, and I feel like showing that again would have come off as like kind of redundant, so it makes sense that they didn't show it again. I just kind of wish that it had been like a little bit clearer that he had abstracted, because I really wanted that like gasp moment where I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, he abstracted. But I never got that, because I was just like, oh look, there goes Queenie. And I was thinking, I was like, maybe if there was a way to differentiate between the different abstracted forms, like if it was almost like there was some tiny element on them that made it clear who it was or who they had been before they abstracted, so then you could have recognized that element and been like, oh my gosh, that's Jax. And maybe I'm just like rewriting the show here or whatever, but that was just what I thought. And then I have in my notes, oops, just Jax, because yeah, I have the same critique that a lot of people had with this show, is that it focused so heavily on Jax's character and like nothing on the other ones. And I can say this as somebody who, like, Jax was my favorite character, and I know, please don't send the firing squad, but I can acknowledge that he was not a good person when he was in the circus, but he was still a very interesting and, in my opinion, like well-written character. A lot of people try to say that he just fits like the stereotypical archetype of the bully who's really just hurting inside, but it's like, I feel like he's so much more than that, and I think that we saw a lot of that in the finale, and I like that we got that information about him, and I wish that we'd gotten that same kind of focus on all of the characters. It felt almost like we were gonna get like a different episode with each character, or like Pomni talking with each character, and we were gonna like get to know more about them, but that never really happened. Somewhere near the middle, they just decided, well, let's just go more about Jax. And I think a big part of that is because Gooseworks has openly admitted that Jax is her self-insert character, and so that's why it focuses on him so much, which, one, that's just bad writing, and two, why would you make the worst character in the show your self-insert? And why would you admit to that? Like, I completely get having self-inserts that maybe aren't the most like morally upright or whatever, but like, he was like awful. Like, he was terrible. And then to be like, yeah guys, that's me. That's like when the creator of My Hero Academia said that Mineta is his self-insert, and Mineta is like awful and he's always touching his classmates inappropriately and like sexualizing them, and it's like, why would you do that? And then why would you admit to that? Like, what? But yeah, I wish so much that we had gotten more backstory on the other characters. I feel like we barely knew anything about Pomni, and she was literally our main character. We entered the circus when she did. We know nothing about Zubul except that, I don't know, they like worked in a bar. Okay. And something that I noticed and something I was a little bit unsatisfied with was like, I feel like the things that we learned about each character were either, you know, shared in confidence to one other person, or that one scene in, I think, episode 5, Untitled, when they were all sitting in like the black and white bar and just like talking about their lives before the circus. It was like everything that we learned about the characters were what they were willing to share. And that's very surface level. That doesn't really help us get to know them deeply or personally, versus Jax, who pretty much everything that we learned about him was in his head. It was inside his head. It was up for analysis, and we were able to really like dig deep and find out things that he was trying to suppress or shut down or not give any light to. And obviously I'm not saying that should be the standard for like every animated character ever, but I was like, if you're gonna do that for one character, it's going to make every other character look incredibly shallow. Like, I see what we could have gotten for everybody, or just like anybody else, and we got nothing. And I totally get that as an independent studio, Glitch had limited resources and time and money and animators. I completely understand that, and I'm content with what we got, but I would be happy with more. And then now on to the ugly, which again is not ugly. It's just things that I don't think worked in the show, or things that just like left me frowning after watching the finale. And the first is like kind of not fair because it's not exactly the content of the show, but it's stuff to do with the cast. If you haven't seen it, basically a large portion of the cast, I think it was Gooseworks and then Amanda, who was Ragatha's voice actor, and Michael, who's Jax's voice actor, were all exposed for like saying and joking about the N-word a couple years ago. And a lot of people like to be like, oh, that was years ago, blah, blah, blah. But like, these are grown adults. Like, I don't think it's fair to coddle them and be like, oh, they just didn't know, because it's like, no, they were like in their 20s. You should know by then. Like, we should be holding them accountable and holding them responsible like we would with anybody else. You can't just give them a free pass because they voice your favorite character. Like, that's not fair. And a lot of people like to say like, oh, they've grown since then, like that they're not the same person, which, one, you don't know them personally, so you can't say that. But also, there was no sense of accountability or just willing to own up to their mistakes until everything started coming out. And even then, I don't even remember if any of them publicly apologized. I'll fact check that. A good contrast is something that I saw recently about Danny Gonzalez, right? So recently a clip of him on stream came up on my page, and he was basically talking about how one fan messaged him and let him know that he had said like a slur or something insensitive in one of his past videos. And it was literally only one person. It wasn't like a whole horde of people banging on his door and telling him that he said this. It was literally just one person private messaging him. But he took the initiative to get on stream and publicly be like, hey, I said this. I had absolutely no intention of being offensive. I am so sorry if I hurt anybody. I never want to hurt anybody. Like, he took responsibility. He apologized. He expressed he had no ill intent. He was going to do better in the future. And only one person had to bring it up for him to do that. And what he did, he didn't even do it on purpose, versus what Gooseworks and all of them were saying. That was completely on purpose because they were joking and laughing about it and then just tried to like brush it off like it was nothing. And that's just very irresponsible to me. And it made me feel like kind of guilty as a consumer to be like watching the show, because I was like, I don't want to associate with this show if this is like what the creator is like and if this is what the people working on it are like. But at that point, I think the first 8 episodes were already out. I was like, it's gonna kill me if I never see the finale. So I basically just like distanced myself as much as I could. I still engage in like the fandom and like other people because obviously like they're not at fault. That's literally why I'm making this video, because I think I can still be involved in like the fandom culture of it all. And then more content based, I was very dissatisfied with all of the unanswered questions in the show. Like, there were a billion loose ends and like plot lines that went nowhere, and it feels like Glitch just like low-key forgot about them. Like, there was everything with like CNA and like Kane's powers and the limits of them, and Scratch the first abstraction and like everything like that. I feel like it was never fully explored in the way that the show set them up to be. I've seen that Gooseworks has been answering questions on her like Tumblr, but like, I shouldn't have to seek an outside source just to get answers about the show that I've already watched that's finished. Like, that's the kind of stuff that needs to be in the show, right? And then also the fact that there's so many content-based questions that everybody has that Gooseworks is answering. I'm like, that just shows that the plot was like unfulfilled. Another complaint that I had was like the whole brain scan thing being revealed in the first like 0.01 second of the movie. Like, that was literally the entire plot and mystery of the show, and now you've explained it in the first second when Kinger's just like, we're brain scans of people that are real, and then everybody's just like, oh man, and then they just kind of move on. And I was like checking the progress bar and I was like, there's still like 50 minutes left. What is the rest of this?
It's to mess up like this and everyone takes his side? Brain scans. What the hell?
Like, that's what everybody came for. That's what kept everybody coming back, and now it's over. So what's left? Like, what was even the point? It just felt like they were just dragging it on for Jax's sake, because they would rather finish off Jax's character arc than the actual central plot. And then another thing about the ending, and this is more me personally, but I didn't want a happy ending. I didn't like the ending that we got. And for me, I never really like happy endings, to be completely honest. I find it to be very dissatisfying when we go through an entire arc, an entire journey with our main characters. We get emotionally invested, we feel the highs and the lows with them, and then everything just ends and it's like, happily ever after. It's just so frustrating. Like, I want there to be a sense of loss. I want there to be a sense of what we've been through and what we've overcome and what we've had to sacrifice to get here. I want the characters to feel the effects of their trials and tribulations, because then it all feels worth it. You know, I want them to come out okay in the end, but with a piece of them missing, a piece of them that was taken from them by the journey. Because that's how you establish stakes and stuff. That's why it's so frustrating when you watch a show based on like war or something and nobody dies, because we didn't lose anything. It felt like there was never any real danger. I want to feel that, like, man, like, we made it, but at what cost? And it's also because Glitch themselves, if you go onto their page and you look at the playlist for The Amazing Digital Circus, the show is advertised as a psychological dark comedy. There was nothing psychological or dark about this. Like, it started with that premise and, you know, the concept of them being trapped for eternity, seemingly, in the circus, with basically abstraction waiting for them at the end. Like, that was kind of it.
Why not try to find a way to leave?
Well, we usually do when we first arrive, but after a while you start to realize that you really can't leave, and constantly chasing an unattainable goal will start driving you a bit crazy. And eventually you get to asking what the point of anything is, and you completely lose sight of who you are and why you're even alive, and when you reach your breaking point, something really terrible can happen.
Like, I'll never forget, like, the chills that I felt in that first episode, like in the pilot at the very end when Pomni's sitting at the table and it's like slowly zooming out and you hear like the music and she's like dissociating because she's just like this is it. This is my life now. I wanted them to explore that dread and that fear more. Like, near the end, it lost all of that. It felt so like with the power of friendship, and it was just so frustrating. I remember seeing in Fandom Spaces, there were two main theories about how the show was going to end. One being the Soma theory and the other being the dead rotting theory. The Soma theory was basically based on a game called Soma, which followed a similar concept of copying one's consciousness into another vessel or body or otherwise location. And that basically argued that all of the characters in the circus were just digital copies of people that existed in the real world. So as soon as they put on the headset and went into the circus, it just made a copy of their mind basically and put them in the circus. And then the person on the outside just kind of like took the headset off and walked away. And that's ultimately the ending that we got. The other ending was the dead rotting theory, which basically argued that after the characters put the headset on, their actual consciousness and not a copy of it is what was entered into the circus. It was basically just digitized and then sent into the circus. And because they had no way out, their body on the outside was basically just like sitting there. And then as time went on and they weren't like eating or drinking anything, their body would die and then start to decompose essentially, which is very gruesome, but honestly, that's the ending that I wanted. I thought that it would have made an amazing contrast to like this bright, airy, childlike sort of setting that we saw in the circus, and then this grim reality on the outside. Like, I'm not saying they had to show like rotting bodies, obviously, but just, you know, the concept. I can tell that they tried to do that contrast with the abstraction aspect, but it still just felt too like childish. I also think it would have been so cool to show that the exit that they had been searching for and hoping for all along was death, or that it had never existed, or that it was somehow even more like gruesome and disturbing than spending an entire eternity with Kane in the circus. Then we would have had to see them work through that and come to terms with that. And that was the emotional payout that I wanted. I wanted to see that guilt and regret and anxiety. Like, I wanted to see that. I feel like that would have been so much more rewarding and just so much more impactful. And like I said, that's just a personal thing, but I didn't like the ending. I'm sorry. So all in all, I know it sounds like I'm complaining a lot, but I really did like the show. For what it was, I enjoyed it. Could it have been better? Of course, 100 times better. I think that the show was the best somewhere in the middle, after we already had our introduction to the characters, but also before they started to like close off their arcs and make them all like emotionally realized. I liked just sort of getting to know them better. Episode 6, They All Get Guns, was my favorite episode personally. I thought it was just so funny. Like, the script for that episode was so funny. I love how Kane was just like, guns, here, have fun.
Wait, that's just it? Here's guns and have fun?
I didn't say have fun.
It's just a little aimless.
use the sights.
Kane!
Ugh, fine!
Instead of some big elaborate adventure. I also love how we really learned a lot about Ragatha and Kinger and Gangle and Zubul and Jax. We learned so much about everybody in that episode. Honestly, even a little bit about Pomni. But, you know, as the show came to a close, I found personally its story quality kind of declined. And it was maybe a 7 out of 10 near the ending. Because like I said, I feel like it was just kind of dragging on for Jax. It wasn't giving us any sort of like substance in like the main content of the show. And also, I forgot to mention, but in the finale, it was that scene where Ragatha and Pomni hugged. And then as they were walking apart, they kept like looking at each other over their shoulder. And I got so cringed out by that. I was like, oh my gosh, like, go, like just walk. Like, I get that it was supposed to be this like big emotional moment for them, but the hug already was. I felt like dragging it out with them gazing at each other as they walk away. I was like, if somebody stared at me that long, I would get really uncomfortable. Like, I was like, please just move on. And that was right before Pomni ran off to go find Jax and enter his mind and help him through whatever. So I was like, there's something infinitely more interesting happening elsewhere in the circus, and I'm watching you two look at each other. Like, stop. Like, that wasn't even a ship. It wasn't like it was like Gangle or Zubul, which I love the ship name, Abs Tragedy. That's so cool. But it wasn't even like it was a ship. It was just them like being like, we're friends for life. And then they were just staring at each other. I was like, please walk away. Anyway, that's pretty random, but I love the show for what it was. I'm grateful we got it. I would love to watch it for the first time all over again, especially now that all of it is out. I wish we could have gotten more filler episodes to sort of just get to know the characters more and who they are outside of, you know, the boxes that Jax tried to put them in, because they were humans. They were full human beings. They were so much more than that. And I know that they were more than that. And they were hinting at the fact that they were more than that, but we never fully got that realization. And I think that it kind of suffered from that. You know what? There's no going back. There's no changing it. The show is as it is, and it's good. I don't really know what else there is to say, but I don't have an outro, so bye.
Congratulations, all of my friends.